You walk into your favorite bait shop and you figure, you know what, it's time for me to try some different hooks. So you walk over to the hook sections and it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all the choices that are out there. Let's take a look. We have octopus, we have circle, we have kale, we have J-style, we have long shank, we have needlepoint. What does this all mean? Well, let me try to break it down for you a little bit. When you decide that you want to try a different hook, we have to take in a few factors. What kind of fish are you going for? Are you going for a bluegill, a crappie, a flathead? Where are you fishing at? Are you fishing around brush? Are you fishing in open water? Are you fishing around docks? And what are you using? Are you using live bait? Are you using worms? Are you using minnows? Are you using plastic? All these factors come together to help us try to figure out what type of hook we are going to need. So, first of all, before we get into all that, let's look at the anatomy of a fish hook. Now, your fish hook is basically going to be all about the same except for some subtle differences. Well, at the very top, we have what is called the eye. Now, if it's in a straight line, it's called an inline eye, or just an eye. But this one, if you notice, angles off. That is called an offset eye. Below that, we have what is known as the shank. Now, the shank can be long, or it can be short. Next, we have what is called the bend of the hook. Then we come up to the barb. The barb is in the opposite direction of the point. What the barb's purpose is once it goes into the fish's mouth, it won't let that hook slide back out. Then we have the business end, which is called the point. Now, the point can either be a regular sharpened point or what they call a needle point or what they call a cutting edge point. And we'll talk about them differences here in a minute. Next, this distance between the point and the shank is called the gap. You've heard of walleye gap hooks. That's what they're talking about, is the gap. Now, if we take an imaginary line and we take it across here, and right in the center we go from here all the way to the bottom of our bend. That is what's known as the throat or the bite of the hook. And then finally, if we flip it around like this, you can see that the hook isn't in line with the shank. It's actually offset, what we call an offset hook. Now, when it comes to hooks, they can be fine wire like your soft Aberdeens, or they can be like this 14-aught hook here, very heavy wire. That's also going to make a difference in your presentation. Now, you've heard us talk about presentation before. If you're fishing, let's say, with a minnow, you're not going to want a real heavy hook because that minnow is not going to swim around naturally like he would with a lighter, softer Aberdeen hook. Another thing about using lighter weight hooks, if you're fishing around brush pile like I typically do for crappie a lot of times, if you're down there popping her up and down and you get caught on something, an Aberdeen hook, you're likely able to straighten that hook, pull that hook up and straighten it out without losing it. If you're using a heavier gauged hook, you lost it. But conversely, what if you're fishing around docks, say you're bass fishing? Then you're going to want a heavier hook compared to the softer wire hooks. If you have to force them out of that dock and around obstacles, you don't want it coming off. So then we come up to the business end, which is the point. Now, this is what's going to do all the work. Now, there's the needle point, which is just like a doctor's needle. It's very sharp right at the point, and it's going to go in and make an incision, and then the barb's going to catch on the backside of the fish's mouth. Now, there's another type of point that's called a cutting edge point. Now, this is more like a razor blade, and it's more for fish with harder mouths. For example, if you're, let's say, trout fishing or crappie fishing, they have very thin or soft mouths. If you were to use a cutting edge style point on your hook, the problem is when you're pulling them fish in from a great distance, this hook is going to be sliding back and forth just like a razor blade. It's going to cut a slit in their lower jaw or wherever it's hooked at. And then by the time you get them up to the boat, they just flip their head and off they go. I'm sure you've had that happen before. So very important to know the difference between the needle point and the cutting edge. There's some considerations, and I see a lot of guys make this mistake with what they choose for an inline or an offset eye. A lot of times with these offset hooks, they're making a mistake by attaching the line right to the eye itself. These type of hooks with the offset eye lend themselves or will work better if you use a Snell knot. Now what a Snell knot does is actually wrap around the shank and then come through the eye. And here's the reason why. When you have a bite on this type of offset hook or offset eye, when you go to set the hook, you want to pull it like this. All right, you want to pull on that shank and pull it in a straight line. But if you tie it to that eye, what happens is when you go to set it, this is going to want to pull in that direction, so you're going to miss a lot of bites. So that's a very important consideration when you're thinking about what kind of hook you need. So we have just barely scratched the surface on fish hooks. There'll be a little bit more a little later on. But let's watch this right now on Jerry's Outdoor Show.